Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the host and moderator here, and I'm also the creator of TheChocolateLife.com. Today, we've got a special guest, Dustin Cornett. People may remember Dustin. He's been on before talking about the Craft Chocolate Challenge that I was a judge on, and we had the results show here recently. But Dustin emailed me recently. He was traveling. He was in Japan, and he had some update about the challenge and his business. And I thought that would be a really good segue to go from last week's building a craft chocolate factory to following that up with ideas from personal experience about building a craft chocolate business. So, Dustin, welcome to the Chocolate Life Live. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
No, it's one of the things that I really love about what it is that I do here at the Chocolate Life and the Chocolate Life Live is having this interaction with people who are members or people who come here and share their stories. I mean, I was wanted as part of my cross country craft chocolate odyssey to stop in Beattyville before I went off to before I came here to Arizona. And unfortunately, the schedule didn't work quite right, even though I was coming to Cincinnati, and it was just like a hop, skip, and 6 or 7 jumps to Beattyville. I wasn't able to make it. But you were off in Japan.
Yes.
Taking a visit and for family reasons. But what I want to do today, and we'll get to that and its connection because I think there is a connection. What I want to do is I want to focus on some things I think are important predictors of success when people think about a craft chocolate business. So number one, with my consulting clients, one of the things I talk about is, okay, number one, what is your definition of success? How do you know when you are successful? Right. Now that definition can change over time, but when you start off, you need to have a definition of success. And that plays into an idea of what kind of business we're creating. So are we creating a business that I believe I'm eventually going to sell? So I need to think about an exit strategy, liquidity events, and all those kinds of things as part of my business planning. But then I have the idea of like, I'm going to create something which is closely held. So it's going to be me, it's going to be immediate members of my family. And then you have the question about succession strategy. What happens when you no longer are interested in or no longer willing or no longer able to be able to continue what it is that you're doing. Right? So I want to focus, if you don't mind, over the course of the rest of the episode on those kinds of issues. But first, I want to start off by asking a basic question. So we have the Chocolat Inn. There's a cafe associated with the inn, and there is a craft chocolate brand. So what came first, the chocolate egg and the chicken who laid the chocolate egg? How did those all, and why Beattyville?
Okay, so first Beattyville, because this is my hometown, so it was the natural landing spot for my wife and I when I moved back home. So I used to live in Japan, and that's where I met my wife. So how that kind of came to be for the chocolate is when we moved back, we didn't really have an idea of what to do. I didn't expect my wife to want to live in Beattyville, but she threw me a curveball and she actually wanted to stay here. She's from the second biggest town in Japan, so I didn't think my little small town would have much to offer her, but she loved the peacefulness. She loved the really nice people here. And she wanted to start a life here. So I had to start thinking about what can we do? There's not a lot of opportunities. I can't just go get a job. And, at that point, her English wasn't well enough to really work anyway here. So I had to create something. And I found my grandma's candy recipes, which I was always fascinated with. She hadn't made them since I was like in elementary school, but they're like legendary. So I found these recipes and I started working them. They're like boxed chocolates, like buttercreams and vanilla creams and caramels and things like that. And they were fantastic. And I thought, I don't want to let this die. I want to continue this, whether it's a hobby or whether I can make a business around it. I have to continue this. And I tried to get more information from my grandmother. She was alive at the time, but she was suffering from dementia. But she would tell these stories and she would just go over and over the same stories, but sometimes there would be a little bit more information than the previous one. And she talked about calling up Hershey's and having them send her a 10-pound chocolate bar. And my uncle would tell this story too, because his friends wouldn't believe that there was such thing as a 10-pound chocolate bar. Like it looked just like a Hershey's bar. It was just 10 pounds. And while that is an interesting story, Hershey's then and Hershey's now and all that is quite different. So I thought maybe I can bring my chocolate to the table to complement her candies. So that is what piqued my interest in creating bean to bar chocolates, more
So,
portraiture chocolate.
but at this point, you had an idea about what craft chocolate was, right? For some reason, had you been experimenting already with making your own chocolate, or did the idea of actually, oh, I'm going to make my own chocolate, come out of the idea of resurrecting your grandmother's recipes?
It came from resurrecting the
Okay.
recipes. I made the recipes. I actually used Ghirardelli chocolate the first time I made the recipes. And then I'm like, all right. And we sold them at a festival and they were popular. And like, all right, so now if I want to continue moving forward with this, I want to bring my chocolate to this. But, how do you make chocolate? So
Mhm.
on the internet research, you find John Nancy has got a website about it, and you start to study a little bit about, okay, I can do this, I can do that. And then I bought the machine, and then little by little, I'm learning how to make chocolate. Okay, so that's how it started. But even at this time where the passion starts to happen, realism, like realistically, I can't sell gourmet chocolate in Beattyville in Eastern Kentucky. They don't know what this is. There's not enough disposable income. It's just not possible to make a business just doing that. So
Mhm.
had a discussion with my wife. She'd been interested in baking, so she started studying and learning more about baking. So she thought, okay, we can do these baked goods and we can also have this candy and this chocolate.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how it started. And then we needed a place to do it. So I found a place to do it, but the building was huge and it was going to be free to use if we fixed it up, but it was huge.
Mhm.
So I decided to make it a co-op, and I reached out to other individuals that wanted to start little businesses, and we all put them into that one spot. And someone else was doing coffee in the town, so I thought, all right, I don't need to do coffee. That would go along with the cafe. We can do the baked goods and we can do the chocolate. So that's the route we went, and we started a little coffee shop type co-op deal,
Mhm.
which was cool. But around that time, and I should say that we didn't have a home then either. I was living with my brother, and then we ended up moving to a Bible camp. So, like, apartments and things like that just don't really exist around here. So, it was hard to find a place to live. So we were at a Bible camp, and this place came on the market. It was an old motel, and it had a home. So we were like, great, we need a home. And we
Mhm.
could transform that motel into something cool and bring our cafe there.
Mhm.
And, after like getting rejected by 5 different banks or something like that, one finally said, okay, we'll do this, and
Mhm.
took a chance on us. And from then it was like work every day, nonstop, go, 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 make sure it works.
Well, I think that anybody who starts a business knows that when you're in startup mode, everybody is what I call the chief everything officer. So everybody has, like whatever needs to get done, that's the hat you're wearing at any particular time. But you've got 3 different businesses, it sounds like, that you're starting up at the same time. So you're working at starting up this branded hotel, and then you have this cafe business, and you're starting and a chocolate making business. But I think that the point here, if I can, the point that I want to make is that you didn't start off with this as the vision for what it is that you wanted to do. What happened is the circumstances of your location, right, sort of forced, if not directed, how you moved forward. So the question is, at what point did you actually sit down and write a formal business plan? About what is, or is that something that you're still on the chalkboard of things that need to get done?
So I wrote a formal business plan to try to acquire the loan needed,
Okay.
and most places didn't look at it. So I was like, well,
Mhm.
they're just not going to believe that I can do what I say I'm going to do. So I'm like, scrap that, whatever. So I don't have a formal business plan for what I'm doing because it's basically I'm doing it. It's in my head. I'm just going to roll with it and learn from it and the experience from it. But the next phase of things, that was, that's going to be a better idea to do. This phase of things was a lot of adjusting. So it was really hard to plan because I didn't really know where things were going to go. I was new to lodging. I knew my area was popular, but I didn't know if I was too far out of that tourist area to attract enough people. And it was just all kind of a risk. And I thought I could make it work. I did make it work, but I didn't know where I would have to adjust. I did more coffee than I expected to do. And we thought we might have to adjust and do more lunch food, but we didn't have to. The pastries grew enough where we didn't really have to get too involved with like a lunch menu, which was nice. So it was more of a lot of adjusting than to writing everything down and trying to go that path, which, I'm not a businessman.
I was going to ask, I'm guessing you don't have an educational background, which includes formal accounting principles in terms of doing this.
Nope, broadcast journalism.
So it's amazing the paths that we all take to get to this place. But the point that I think I want to make here is that having a formal business plan, I mean, in this case, you needed one in order to go through the process of getting financing for one part of your business, is a really good discipline to go through, because it should force you to think about the scale of things that you need to be able to do things at. So, in order to be able to afford a loan repayment of X number of dollars a month, you need to know how much stuff you need to sell at which margins and what the mix of things is going to be in order to be able to make sure that you get there. Right. So the discipline is there. And in my experience, and have you gone back and looked at that business plan at all? Because, in my experience, just having that business plan and looking at it and seeing the difference and going, oh, wow, this is really so different from where I thought I was going to start off. Right. Is often just a good bit of reflection to go through.
So the original business plan was basically focused on lodging only, as the cafe supplementing income, maybe during months where lodging wasn't as popular in the winter and things like that. And that's also where chocolate would come through. The months that chocolate are more popular are the months that tourism is less popular. So I thought I can work that and make that work to do what I want to do. Plus, people that come here would buy chocolate. It's a good souvenir. If you're coming to the Chocolat Inn and you don't buy chocolate, then why are you coming to the Chocolat Inn, right? So that works hand in hand, and not have to just have locals come in and buy your products. Locals come in and buy certain products, but locals don't come in and buy exactly all the products. Some are. Well,
let's talk about that as well, because many years ago, I was having conversations about segmentation of the market. So what is mass market and what is the premium market and what is the difference in price and things like that. And people were telling me, you can't sell a good quality product, right, which is priced at, like, let's say $16 a pound, because when you think about the ingredients costs and things like that, then it's just not viable. But you're in Eastern Kentucky, and you've already said there's not a whole lot of disposable income. And my guess is when people are thinking about quality chocolate, they're thinking about like Russell Stover's or a Whitman Sampler or something like that. They're not necessarily thinking about, some big expensive French brand. So how did that aspect of things? I mean, so number one is that a lot of people would think, if I'm making my own chocolate, it's got to be a lot more expensive, right, when I'm actually selling a bonbon or a piece of chocolate than if I bought it in. But you've also got other ingredients challenges. So can you talk about, the price point that you needed to hit in order to be able to make it reasonably accessible for where you were, and how that had an impact on the kinds of ingredients that you could go and source, given the fact that you're making it with your own chocolate, which is a relatively expensive ingredient to begin with.
And to add more to that, actually, the year I started trying to do business, The Guardian and CNN actually labeled my town the poorest white town in America. So that was some interesting stuff too. I just priced it how I needed to price it and just make less of it in a sense to see what was going to happen. The first several years after we got the inn and started working and got it open, which was we opened it in 2017, chocolate was really on the back burner. It was more seasonal. Bonbons, definitely seasonal. Bars here and there, a little bit of packaging for some things, but mostly doing unique bars that they just couldn't get anywhere else. That, you know, inclusions that they'd never seen before, things that I wasn't like competing against Hershey's exactly for, because it was unique. That helped. But after doing more with the inn and the cafe growing, then when COVID hit, basically I was like thinking about things. I'm like, okay, I'm not doing much chocolate, but I started all this to do chocolate. So what am I doing? So I decided to kind of relaunch my chocolate and focus on that, and then focus on percentages and origins, and try to relay that information to our customers. Now that I had a customer base, now that I had a bigger following, I can tell them about it. And now they know my product from before. They understand the quality of my product from before, whether it's pastries, coffees, or something different. They will believe me. You know, they understand me now. So I couldn't have done that, I don't think, from the get-go. I think it would have been really hard.
So let's ask an interesting question. So if people are coming to the Chocolat Inn, they're going to buy some chocolate from you, right? That's just as a souvenir of what they're doing. But do fairly precisely what the product mix is? The people who come and stay at the inn, are they regular buyers of the chocolate online once they get back home? How much of it is local? How much of it is different kinds of business? And does that mix, how has your marketing towards that mix changed? Now, prefacing by that is like, all right, you're in the lodging business, COVID hits, everything goes bang, and we're at zero. And so you've got this other proposed income stream, which has been secondary up until this point. And so you say, well, I've got all this time in my hands. Why don't I go work on it? But for people who, for example, I'm in Prescott, Arizona. I have a chocolate factory, a retail shop involved in the partnership I'm developing. And it's interesting to see what the mix of, people who come because they know us, or people who come for some completely different reason, as opposed to people who have other motivations for doing what they're doing. So how has the how has this trio of things you're doing, right, been something that you've consciously taken advantage of? I'm trying to speak to strengths in terms of the particular situation that you're in, and how to take it, how people might learn from that example and take advantage of it in their own business.
So people staying at our inn, they have disposable income. If they can afford to stay at our inn and travel to where they're at, they can afford to buy our chocolate. So that's kind of a good target. We didn't do any online sales, and I tried to get that going when COVID hit as a way to have some income coming in, but we didn't really have that set up properly. So I wasn't really able to do much of the online sales then. Last year was the first time I really started an online store. And then I had everybody's email that stayed here before, shot the email out, and boom, 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 I have chocolate going all over the country from people who had stayed with us that now get a chance to get the chocolate. So that was great. That was good. That showed me that what I had done previously could continue to help. Whether they're able to come back to the inn or not, they can still get our product. So that was great. Connecting all three, I think, is a great business, because people are lodging with you and they wake up and we give them breakfast and they have a cafe right there with the pastries and everything. That's just a great amenity. And then to be able to have gourmet chocolate and bean to bar chocolate right there too, that they can take with them to give as souvenirs, all of it really works. We didn't do any marketing either. I didn't spend really any money on advertising and things like that. So a lot of it was just spread by word of mouth, and we were in some magazines and on TV and things like that, so people found out about us. So I think if I was more of a businessman and could take advantage of certain things like that, we could grow more, but then I would have to figure out how to operate, because I don't really want to hire and do so many different things like that. I prefer to do it myself. So it's finding that balance. It's difficult.
Well, that balance works in a bunch of different ways. I mean, it's, often it makes sense to have people take care of those things that we don't like or we know we're not good at. Right. So there is that aspect of hiring. But, if you're running an inn business, for example, I mean, the demands, like if you're in the middle of depositing chocolate bars and all of a sudden you have to check in a new guest, right? Obviously, checking in the new guest has priority, or if
Yep.
there is an issue, you need to take care of it. So there are lots, again, in the retail, if I've got a small chocolate business, I'm in the back making something and somebody walks in the front door and you don't have an employee whose job it is to sit there waiting for walk-in traffic, then you need to go and take care of them right away. So what I think that talks to is, at the very beginning, we talked about this idea of how do you define success, right? And so for you, right, if I'm hearing you properly, part of the definition of success for you is not outgrowing your ability to be able to have personal involvement in the entire process from beginning to end. You don't want to be an employer.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. I want to create a place where I can enjoy what I'm doing, and since my family wants to be part of that, I want to enjoy doing that with my family. And when it would become too much, I wouldn't want to grow into that. I would want to, just that is what it is, and that's my stopping point, and understanding how to manage it all.
Gotcha.
So,
Right. So really, really quickly, Dustin, your video is frozen. Could you
yeah.
just toggle your camera on and off and see if we can get it to work? And while you're doing that, what I'm going to do is let's give it a little time in order to recover. What I want to do is I want to share with everybody. You're watching the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. Today, my guest is Dustin Cornett of the Craft Chocolat Inn in Beattyville, Kentucky, and we're talking about building a craft chocolate business. What I want to do is I want to share with everyone right now. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life. You can go there for every single one of these live streams. I create a post, and you can go and look at this post, and there will be links to the Chocolat Inn website. We're going to talk a little bit about the Craft Chocolate Challenge. So there's a link to the Craft Chocolate Challenge here. Also, for people who may not have been here last week, there's a link to last week's episode, which is all about building a craft chocolate factory. So that link is in here as well. Down here, and we got a link to an episode on the Craft Chocolate Challenge. Everything is here. If you're a member of thechocolatelife.com, you can go down here to the bottom and you can add comments. So that's really cool. And I noticed, I don't know if you saw this, Dustin, but Maureen Nikaido, who of Moku Chocolate in Oregon, who has been a multi-award winner in the Craft Chocolate Challenge, was recently awarded a Good Foods Award. Found that out yesterday, and so I decided to post that in the comments today. And welcome back. Glad you got the video going again. But before we jump back into it, I want to say thanks to Henry, I assume Henry Palacio Zambrano, who's says greetings from Ecuador. Thanks, Henry, for that. And if you're watching, in the comments, let us know where you're connecting from, where in the world you're connecting from. I'll get a shout out on the screen. And if you have questions for Dustin, of course, put them in the comments, and we'll get them up for him that way as well. All right. So Dustin, I mean, for most of the last 40 years and all my career in chocolate, I've lived in the New York City metropolitan area. And I think I get really, really, well, I don't think I was really, really spoiled right? When I think about that, and here I am in Prescott, Arizona, and I think I'm still really spoiled in many ways because I think about how close things are to me, right? You're in Beattyville, Kentucky, and so I mean, you talked about inclusions, bars with inclusions, and inclusions people might not think about generally locally, I think, as well as people who are coming to visit you. But how does the ability to source ingredients, right, that you're happy with, figure into the day to day of running your business? I mean, it's got to be a very, very different scenario from what it is that I'm used to. And how do you manage it?
Yeah, more so for my wife's products with the pastries, and then for breakfast for guests. You're talking fresh fruit and other things that we have to drive around an hour to get to. So round trip 2 hours to go find some of these ingredients that we need. So that's a day, for us to go do that. So we have to factor that into our cafe schedule and what we offer. Can't just get it delivered here. So
You're
that's
telling me that Cisco and UNFI and KE and all these companies aren't making daily deliveries to, the big chain restaurants in your area?
um, I've seen Cisco here for Dairy Queen. I'm not sure if it's daily. I know food service typically is weekly here,
Hmm.
like the Gordon Foods and things like that. But they come
Hmm.
around weekly.
Right.
We tried to get fruit from Gordon's before, and it just was bad. So it was just better to go to the right spots at the right time and
Hmm.
work around that. So
Right. Again, I think where it is that I am, and I'm going to name drop some brands, but within easily 5 to 10 minutes of where the facility is located, there's a Walmart, a Costco, a Trader Joe's. We probably have a Sprouts. We've got Fry's and a bunch of other places, and so that that aspect of sourcing is something that we don't have to we can go out and get something at the last minute if we absolutely need to, even if we're paying a little bit more for it than we would if it were delivered. But what about I also have Amazon next day delivery where it is that I am, and reliable UPS second day and FedEx ground delivery. Are you doing Amazon Prime next day delivery in Beattyville, Beattyville, Kentucky? I mean, because there's
uh,
an aspect to all of this which fits into how do you run the business? How careful do you need to be thinking about inventory and other kinds of things?
yeah,
Okay.
inventory is so I'm all about using your weaknesses as your strengths, right? So, and then flipping that around. So, if I'm comparing to New York, you guys' weaknesses would be space, but that would be the opposite for us. So, the fact that maybe I can go ahead and get more of an ingredient at a time than maybe someone in New York could, depending, on the freshness of that ingredient, that helps me with some time. Amazon, about 2 days, something like that. So I can get some like powders or something like that maybe through Amazon, but the Amazon doesn't really offer like the fresh market type of stuff around here. They don't
Mhm.
do it. Yeah. And yeah,
But
we don't have
yeah,
Uber or anything either.
okay.
In
So no
Japan,
Hello
Uber
Fresh.
Eats was nice.
I'm sure. Well, I mean, we'll talk about Japan in a little bit, but the reason why I wanted to bring all of these things together, and this is something that also became a little bit more apparent to me as I was traveling across the country on Amtrak, um, is that you know where you decide to set up your business, right, has an enormous impact on what it is that you're going to do. And I don't necessarily, and I think many people think about that primarily from sort of what is the demographics of my customers, right? So, what locally are people going to be able to purchase from me? But you talked about, yeah, in New York City, space is hugely expensive. The stuff that maybe I'm paying less than $1 a foot at a somewhere in central Arizona can easily be $20 or $30 a foot in New York, and you need to do that, those things. But at the same time, they need to be balanced by these other aspects, which are okay, it's not as easy as I need to in order to be able to get some of the ingredients. And so I need to do a much better job of planning. But there's also this quality of life issue. You've arranged what it is that you're doing in order to be able to include your family and everything about it. And Eastern Kentucky, a lot of outdoor time for what you're doing. I mean, it's really all, again, for me, thinking about how you or organize around your definition of success, which I keep on coming back to when people are putting together their plans. They tend to focus on dollar amounts, but not what things mean in personal terms. Um, so you just got back, or recently got back from a month in Japan, I understand.
Yeah. Yes.
So, so did you come back with interesting ideas for things that you can do in chocolate and pastry from Japan?
Somewhat. I should mention that my thinking is very different now than it was before. So before we went to Japan, we were in the process of selling our property, and then it sold while I was in Japan. We get to stay and do our thing, our cafe and chocolate and all that, but we won't be operating the rooms anymore. So my focus when I was in Japan was a lot on chocolate, and now that I have this time where I can focus on chocolate, because as you mentioned before, if I'm checking someone in the evening when I'm trying to temper some chocolate, that gets hard. So now that I have this time, what am I going to do? And how am I going to make that work? So I was checking out a bunch of chocolate shops in Japan and seeing how they do things and seeing about how craft chocolate businesses is like, if it's booming there or just, if it's the same as here where some areas know about it, but most don't. And it was really interesting. I met with a lot of different makers, mostly Japanese. One guy I met with was from Croatia, and he has a shop in Osaka. And how he does things is a little different than how some of the Japanese makers do things. And then some of the Japanese makers are quite different as well. Have you ever heard of anybody washing the cacao beans before they roast?
As a matter of fact, I have, and there's a bit of controversy there. I first heard about it, I think, oh my gosh, I can't put a date on it, but from Stefan Bonat, right? And so Stefan is a firm believer in leaving all of the microflora on the beans when you start the roast, because they're going to toast, right, in a particular way and lend their flavor. They're going to lend their flavor in the roasting cavity, right, as the beans roast. And so he thinks that washing the cocoa beans before you roast them takes away some of the terroirness, if I can use that word, of the beans. But then there are other people who say, I want to be able to clean the beans from all of those things. So you ran into someone while you were in Japan who washes his beans before he roasts them.
Yeah, both. So before going to Japan, I'd seen it on Instagram, someone washing the beans, and that was new to me. So I'm like, this is one thing I'm going to definitely try to find out about while I was over there. I thought from my experience in Japan, where this, smaller spaces, your machines are going to be pretty close. And I know my roasting machine, it gets dusty. So I thought maybe they're washing this to get rid of some of the dust. I have no experience washing the cacao beans. So I didn't know if that helped with that or not. But it turned out it wasn't. It was more for flavor development and things like that. But some Japanese makers did not agree with the washing of it, and they thought maybe the other maker didn't really know what they were doing and trying to treat it like rice, because you wash rice in water before you make it. So there was really an interesting difference between some of the makers, but the ones that washed it were really serious about it, and even in the roasting of the bean. They would put water in the roaster to also help with the moisture. They wanted to keep the beans moist, which kind of goes against anything that I've thought about with beans, because I try to get them dry. So it was really interesting to see some of that.
Well, I think that the thing which is, I think the point that I would, when I go back, the thing I would hone in on is that cultural aspect of thing. So, what is the connection to the way rice is cooked, and how are we going to do that? I've seen people put moisture into the roaster because things like Salmonella and E. coli will get killed off much more effectively at lower temperatures in higher humidity. Right. And so one reason to throw moisture into the roasting cavity is, so for example, if you're using a combi oven as a roaster, right, you can inject, that's one of the reasons to use it, right? Because you can inject moisture into the cavity and you can do a better sanitizing step. You can get to a 4 or 5 log kill. So 99.999% as opposed to 99% kill, right? So there are reasons to do that, but it hadn't really occurred to me that maybe one of the reasons we're doing it is because that's the way we handle rice, right? That's the way we handle soybeans before we do things.
And as like you put that in for baking bread and things, pastries and bread, you use the moisture. So, but one of the chocolate makers too talked about loving making chocolate during the humid times, like not the tempering of the chocolate when it's high humidity in Japan was a nightmare. But as for like making the chocolate, that's when they like to make their chocolate, which again to me is a different way of thinking. But they make great chocolate, so who am I to question anything?
It does seem counterintuitive. So I think the interesting question there is, if you've gone and visited 10 or 20 makers, I don't know the number. Although you say that you heard that there were as many as 150 craft chocolate makers, not all of them focusing on bean to bar, 150 craft makers in Japan, which seems like about the right number. What are there any specific techniques that you picked up in terms of chocolate making that you've brought back with you that you want to incorporate in your own business?
So sugar is a little different there, and
how is that?
They have more of a refined, like I don't want to say powdery, but kind of a powdery sugar, but not powdered sugar, because here, of course, we can't use powdered sugar because of cornstarch. So I previously didn't pre-grind my sugar. So that's one thing I'm going to try. I'm not going to wash the beans yet, but I will pre-grind my sugar to try to get it finer to see, if that changes some things. There was different makers that would take from one melanger to throw into another melanger. There was makers that would kind of pre-grind the nibs, and then they always throw the nibs in, I guess it's cocoa mass, and first, and I usually do cocoa butter first to kind of warm up the machine. So there's a lot of different ways of making it in a sense, and I was trying to ask why they did it in this order, and why not this order. And my experience in Japan with especially anything related to craft is there's a reason for everything they do. So I was really curious about why they did things the certain way they did things. So I'll probably try some of that later on, throwing the nibs in first and seeing if that changes the flavor any, because sometimes they thought if it got too warm, some of the flavor would go out. So the hot cocoa butter, might be counterintuitive. Different things like that. There was varying degrees of smoothness throughout the chocolate world there. Some really smooth, some kind of not, and then some really coarse.
There's a brand there that we in the United States might know, which is Minimal.
Oh yeah, it's really
so Minimal. So, and when you get the name, you go, yeah, it's a very, very coarsely ground chocolate. It makes sense, given the name, that's where it is that they would be going with that.
Yeah, but they had a beet sugar that they used that it was, yeah.
Well, beet sugar is very common in Europe, often more common than cane sugar. I mean, for example, I've spoken with, so I was speaking with a company called Hind and Vera, and they use only Dutch origin beet sugar for what it is that they're doing. But so apart from playing with the grain size of the sugar, the particle size of the sugar, were anything about what you were there in terms of sugar or other ingredients that you said, this is what I'm going to come, or, just flavor profiles in general? We're going to see ramen noodles as an inclusion. People have done that. I mean, just, that aspect of things. So in terms of inspiration, again, your wife is Japanese. You've lived in Japan. How are you taking that aspect of your visit and bringing it back to Beattyville?
So there's some other teas. We know matcha. So matcha chocolate is pretty popular here. So there's other teas that they use that I'm gonna think about. And then some of them were using like sesame and like miso and different things in their chocolate as well, which was interesting to me. So we'll see what develops there. I'm not. I'm kind of caught between two worlds because I want to start diving into these new things I want to make, but then I transition as well. So I don't want to create too much stuff because I have to figure out maybe where my next spot is. If it's not going to be where I currently am, down the road, maybe that's something I debut there. Maybe I experiment some here. So I'm trying to play around with some of that too. And I haven't had a chance to eat all of the chocolate I got in Japan yet either. I think I visited around 12 different makers, bought a lot of chocolate. But while I was there, I was eating a lot of food. Probably the only human from Eastern Kentucky that gained weight in Japan. But man, I was just eating a lot. So I didn't really have a lot of extra room to eat and sample all this chocolate that I've bought. But I've been doing little by little since I've gotten back, and I need to dive in more to some of those.
Right. So one of the reasons why I want to hone in on this is that, again, one of the things that I talk with my consulting clients about is that you need to strike this sort of work-life balance. And you also need to find a way to recharge your batteries and, rediscover why you fell in love with chocolate in the first place. And if you're in production 12 months a year, that's really, really hard to do. If you only take, a weekend off to go to a festival here and there, it's difficult to do that. So one of the things that I recommend to my consulting clients is that they take an entire month off, right? Take the month of July or August in the Northern Hemisphere. Demand for chocolate is fairly low, chances are, right? You might have some time. And to go someplace where what you can do is you can experience another food culture, right? And another culture entirely, and recharge your batteries, get some inspiration for X and Y and Z. Now, I can imagine you're in Beattyville, Kentucky, and so things like throwing miso into chocolate is going to be a stretch, right? Because the umami-ness is not necessarily something they're going to do. But you didn't. I don't think. Did you start off this trip to Japan having any of that in mind? Right, that you're going there just to, right, do a deep dive and come back out refreshed and.
Oh yeah, 100%. So when I started into being an entrepreneur for the first time, it was literally nonstop. Like every day I'm working, and sometimes like 3 jobs where I wake up and I go help my wife get ready at that co-op we were at. And then I come back to the house where the inn is being rehabbed, and I'm talking to the contractors about what needs to be done that day because I've had plans made with the state for like building inspections. Then I go to my day job, which I had to have a $10 an hour job just to survive. So I go to that office job. It ends at 5. And I go back down to the little co-op cafe that we're doing to help my wife close up. It closes at 6. Then come back to the house where the inn is, and then go through all the rooms and check all the progress of the day, and then get to the house and check off the list and make the plan for the next day, over and over and over again until we opened. And then when we opened, I have to build the business up. So it's kind of been nonstop. We haven't had a chance to really go anywhere or do anything. So this was the first chance. So definitely was looking forward to that, being re-energized, and I feel good about it all. I feel great. I was, before moving back to the States, like I never thought about chocolate. So when I was in Japan previously, I wasn't going and checking out places like that. I wasn't experiencing that world. I was over there just playing baseball for fun and teaching English and just enjoying traveling around the world. Yeah. So the culinary world that, Japan is famous for, I wasn't really diving deep into then. So I was super ecstatic to be able to do that this time around.
So on top of all of this stuff, you decide, hey, I'm going to create a competition. Yeah, I'm not busy enough.
Yeah.
I'm not busy enough. I need to go. So was so you know the competition is about. So this is the Craft Chocolate Challenge, is about giving perhaps smaller makers who may not be entering into the big international competitions just sort of the first feet in the water, right? But how did it, so you talked about not actively marketing what it is that you're doing, but I think that marketing of some form is really, really important, right, locally as well as greatly. So how has all of the work that's been associated with the Craft Chocolate Challenge had either a positive or a negative effect? When we look at our marketing exercises, we need to go, this has been a good thing or this has been a bad thing, here's what we need to change. How has the challenge, because from what I can tell, it's the major part of the chocolate part of your business, right? In terms of marketing, how has that been effective or no for?
Yeah, it's been good, and the challenge needed to happen because people like me that could never get away and network with other chocolate makers and not really in an area where there's other chocolate makers around. Uh, we need to have those conversations with each other. We need to let each other kind of try our chocolate and see where we're going with things. It's good to be confident in your own chocolate, but you really need some type of feedback from somebody else and then some type of spark sometimes from somebody else to keep you going. So it needed to happen. So it wasn't created to kind of spotlight my business, but because it's through my business, people are curious about my chocolate because I created a contest. So I probably am reaching people that I normally wouldn't have been able to reach because of the contest and their curiosity in the chocolate that I'm making. And hopefully they'll continue to try my chocolate, because I want to continue to make it better. And part of the contest is to do that for everybody. And to speak on the contest a little bit more, when I was in Japan, when I was meeting with some of these chocolate makers, I did mention about the contest to pretty much all of them. And they mentioned other contests, and one was sad because he said that his matcha was rejected, and he didn't know anything why or whatever. And I ate his matcha white chocolate, and it was really good, but it was more coarse than what a normal matcha white chocolate would people would be used to. But he doesn't tell why. He doesn't say that he makes it this way because it's his style or anything. So you're just eating it and it's gritty and you're like, well, I don't know about this. I'm like, you got to relay that information to people so they know what you're doing. And they didn't, maybe they didn't reject your flavor. It's maybe another part of it. And he's really curious about entering our contest. So we'll see.
Well, what I want to do, if I can, is talk about that aspect of things. Not that aspect of things. Talk about this networking and conversation aspect of things. Because one of the things that, another of the things that I learned in my, cross country craft chocolate odyssey is, speaking with Paul Picton at Maverick in Cincinnati. He sort of lamented the fact that there are not very many people in the craft chocolate community who converge on Cincinnati at any point. And so if he wants to do any of these conversations, what he needs to do is 2 days a year in Seattle, right? Or a day at this festival or a day at that festival. So what is you personally, um, how do you find, the existing online communities which are focused on answering questions about chocolate production? I mean, do you find them, fulfilling the need that you've got for the kind of conversations that you're looking to have with other makers about your work?
First,
And how much time do you spend in them on a regular or irregular basis?
First, Paul is a great mind, and I'm lucky to have him not too far away. I've talked to Paul quite a bit, so I'm glad to have him around. He's been, a bit of a mentor as well. As for the online forums and things, for the most part, it seems like the same people commenting. There might be 2,000 members, but it seems like there's like maybe 10 that always comments. And information is information, and then sometimes they have different ideas about things. It's always good. You're not going to go wrong about being able to dive in and find a new way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a great source, and I think it's needed as well. Excuse me. I would like it to, more people to maybe be involved, but most chocolate makers, we're busy too, and we don't want to be conflictive if we disagree with something. So we gotta just let things go, and instead of like arguing back and forth. It's a different than like face to face, where I can say something and then somebody's not just reading it and thinking about it later, or putting thinking differently about you because of your idea. So I think being able to network in person and go to these festivals and these events is probably the best way. But it's in Kentucky and around Cincinnati, we don't have that.
Right. And, again, that's one of the things that just sort of really jumped out at me as I was making my journey is like, again, not a whole lot of people are making it to Kansas City for the chocolate, right? And not many people are making it to Santa Fe in New Mexico, for the chocolate. And, unfortunately, these in-person events don't happen on a regular enough basis. Again, 2 days once a year in Seattle is not necessarily, gonna be able to fill an immediate need for what it is that you're doing. What I do want to do is a quick shout out though. So here is a post on thechocolatetelife.com right now. It's actually pinned in the top rail. So if you come over here and you can take a look at this story here. So the cross country Craft Chocolate Odyssey second leg, Cincinnati. If you go and click on that story, you'll see a little bit about downtown Cincinnati, and you'll get some of the things that I learned when I was in Cincinnati visiting with Paul Picton at Maverick Chocolate. You'll see some of their back of house, some of their front of house, and things like that. We also talk about food because if you're going places, you have to eat, and so we'll talk about food. And there is a picture of Paul sitting on the front porch. For me, one of the things that was really nice about this is that there are people that I have, for the most part, only met virtually. Right, so I've met online, sometimes face to face with video, but usually correspondence through the Chocolate Life, and having a chance to sit down over the course of several hours, over the course of several days, right, gave me an insight into why they're doing what they're doing, how they're doing what they're doing, and what their goals are and things like that, which just enrich my understanding of things. And so, Dustin, for me, doing this sort of cross-country craft chocolate odyssey and doing things which engage people at a very different level from what they're used to doing is something that I walked away from this entire experience with, as much as exhausting as traveling across country on Amtrak was. It was something not at all like the trains in Japan. So we're sort of getting at the end, sort of getting at the end of the hour. So you've sold what you've said, if I can, right, is you've sold the in business.
Yes.
This happened. The transaction happened while you're in Japan, and so this is a liquidity event, right? In venture capital terms, so there is some money and some freedom associated with that. So you're no longer involved in the day-to-day operation of the inn, checking people in, checking people out, doing all that housekeeping stuff. You're still in the cafe, so you're providing breakfast and the other things that are associated with guests. Yes, or
we won't be
not breakfast.
we won't be doing breakfast for the guests anymore. But when the cafe is open, they can come to the cafe.
Correct. So you still have the cafe business. You've got the chocolate business, and you are co-located with the inn. Correct.
Yes.
So
it's attached. Yeah, it's attached. So,
Good.
And then my house is right next to it, so we're still there.
Right. So in terms of you've got a young daughter. At some point, you need to be thinking about university and things like that. is the future of the Chocolat Inn chocolate brand Beattyville, Kentucky? Right. So how are you thinking about the next little while and the next venture, and what are some of the trade-offs that you're making? Because scaling up or growing your business or making a change, right, is something that every single one of us, right, is a question we all have to deal with at some point. So Justin.
So
Ah,
I'm not ruling out Beattyville.
okay.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You
Okay.
just the
So
the
I'm not.
video.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm
No.
gone.
No. Go ahead. It just broke up a little bit.
Okay. So I'm not ruling out Beattyville. Um, I like my customers here, of course. We've established a business here. It would really depend on the overhead for the next part, because the overhead for the inn was a lot. That a cafe paying the overhead for the inn is difficult. But if the cafe is smaller and has less overhead than the inn, which would naturally be the case, then it's possible to do what I want here. But I have to think about other things too, opportunities for my daughter, and maybe being a little bit closer than an hour away to do supply runs and things like that, like the quality of life part as well. The financial part is, for us, is we have to make money because we have to live. We have to have money to live. We don't need to try to make as much money as possible and try to be rich from this, because that's probably not really feasible anyway. So it's about making the life that we want to live and finding out where that's going to be based on what we want. So we know if we go to a bigger city and we do things how we do things, we'll probably be too busy and we'd have to hire, and then you have to take care of people. And if you hire somebody, you kind of are responsible for their life, for their livelihood to a certain degree. That's a lot of responsibility. And I just want to enjoy doing what I'm doing and do it with my family. So I need to be cautious about my overhead, and go from there. If I can control my overhead, then I can kind of control what I want to do more. So that's how I view it. I don't view it as maybe a true entrepreneur would, per se, more
Well,
of an
so
artist.
well, yes and no. I'm going to push back a little bit on that, if I can. So, as somebody who comes out of a fine arts background, right? So, I went to a place called the Rhode Island School of Design, right, and studied photography and got a Bachelor of Fine Arts from there. Um, there is the sort of the auteur, the person for whom no compromise of their artistic integrity is possible. They're going to do it their way, and it's um, not about what it costs or what it earns or anything like that. It's about the artistic vision. And we have had people like that in chocolate who have been commercial failures and have had to shut their businesses, right? Now, an entrepreneur, we tend to think, I think there are two ways to think about it. Number one is, I'm an entrepreneur, so what it is, I'm going to create my own business and I'm going to be in control of my own future, right? Which sounds like where you are as an entrepreneur. What you've done is you've set for yourself very clearly, this is why I am in business. This is what I am doing, right? And you happen to be doing it with chocolate. But it's being able to, your definition of success is being able to spend time with my family and have an activity that we can all be engaged in, and it enables us to put a roof over our head and to feed ourselves and enjoy ourselves, like taking a vacation to a place like Japan every once in a while.
Yes.
That's a definition of success, and you're an entrepreneur within that context. Now, there's some people in the chocolate business who said, no, I want to grow and be real big. And so what I need to do is I need to accept outside investment and all these other things. I mean, these are conscious choices that you make, right? And you can be successful at any level or not successful at any level if you're not really aware of the interplay of what it is that's going on, right? And that's very vague. The interplay of what it is that's going on, of how do the choices that you make around why you're in business and how do I determine what success is, how does that have an influence on the path and how you reflect on what just happened and what the next stage is. right? And that's, I think, for me, that is what it is that I wanted to get through most in this particular episode, right?
Yeah.
That when you start a craft chocolate business and you build a craft chocolate business, you have a path and a sort of a destination in mind, but there needs to be some flexibility on where that path goes, right? And there needs to be, I think, also some flexibility on what the destination is. That if you get caught up in this is exactly the path and this is exactly the
Yep.
destination. So the question is, you having fun still? Are you having fun still
Yeah,
doing
I'm
what it
having
is that you're
fun,
doing?
and
All right. 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 Your wife's having
okay,
fun.
I
Your
think there
daughter's
was a little
having
delay
fun.
there.
Okay. So you're having fun. Your wife's having
Yes,
fun. Your daughter's
yes,
having fun. All right.
we're all having fun,
Um,
and the part about the inn, like
yeah.
we decided to sell the inn because it was too busy. We couldn't keep
Right.
up with everything, so we're kind of that's what we'll try to go to the next phase with, being able to break that down a little bit more and have
Mm-hmm.
more control over our time and things like that. So yeah, we're all having a good time still.
Great. So, Dustin, I want to say thank you very much for joining me today. Before we leave, what I want to do is I want to say thank you to all of the members of thechocolateLife.com. You're the sponsors of what it is that we do. If you'd like to support what we do, become a member of the Chocolate Life. You can see this green button up here. It says account for me because I'm logged in, but it will say join if you're not a logged in member. So please join and support what it is that we're doing here. We don't have a Patreon. Everything is done through the Chocolate Life here. So please, I, you know, it should be obvious. Your support is very, very much appreciated. And I also want to thank our most recent partner who joined the Chocolate Life, which is Cocoa Supply. And if you want to learn more about the Chocolate Life partners and specifically Cocoa Supply, you can click on this post on the Chocolate Life, and you can learn more about this most recent partner. And with that, what I want to do after my earphone drops out, yay, I don't know what that did to the quality of the audio because a microphone, earphone dropped out. What I want to do is say, Dustin, thank you very much again. And to remind everybody, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, this coming Tuesday, Volker Lehmann, Cacao in Bolivia from Hacienda Tranquilidad. Look forward to having you join me then. In the meantime, everybody have a great weekend. And Dustin will be talking soon.